pastor, and so I have grown up in the Adventist church all of my life and have watched the changes that have taken place. And there's two things that concern me more than anything else. One is the damage that music is doing to the Adventist church, and the damage that a false understanding of Ellen White is doing to the Adventist church. So I have spent many years teaching the truth that I found in regard to Ellen White's calling and her ministry. So we're going to start today with part one. And by the way, I like the term testimony of Jesus better than spirit of prophecy. And so that's why I've entitled this the testimony of Jesus. And we're going to look at two questions. Does the Bible predict Ellen White's ministry? Because if the Bible says nothing, then there could be reason for concern. And the second question, was Ellen G. White inspired? Or is she just like a pastor, a very dedicated pastor? Is she actually inspired and given messages by God? So we'll look at some of the Bible evidence. Some is general, some is specific. In Joel chapter 2, verse 28, we read, "And it shall come to pass afterward." That's like saying in the last days. "It shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions." Now that might not seem like it's talking about Ellen White, but as we look at what Peter said on the day of Pentecost in Acts 2, verses 15 to 17, "For these are not drunken, as ye suppose, but this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. And it shall come to pass in the last days." So he quotes from Joel as a prophecy of what happened on the day of Pentecost. And of course, that was Peter that was given the gift to speak in the power of the Holy Spirit. And that's why there was such an amazing result. But also it mentions the last days. Well, in some ways we can call from the beginning of the New Testament the last days, but more specifically the last days is our day. And so that's where we find a very specific prediction in Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. It says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." And I think everyone realizes that the great and dreadful day is a judgment day. When Jesus comes back to earth, the investigative judgment is finished so that he knows who to take home. But for those that are not going to go home with him, it's the great judgment day. And it's not a pleasant day. It's a great and dreadful day of the Lord. Then we have another clue in Matthew 17, verses 10 through 13. "And his disciples asked him, saying, Why then say the scribes that Elias must first come?" Now that's just the New Testament spelling of Elijah. "And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elijah truly shall first come and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elijah is come already. So this was kind of a shock to them. And they knew him not. In other words, the people of God did not recognize the modern Elijah. And they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. Now this is key for a couple of reasons. When the Elijah comes, that's before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, they're not going to be named Elijah. The connection has to do with the kind of work that was done. Elijah was raised up in a time of apostasy. John the Baptist was raised up in a time of apostasy. And to try to protect the Seventh-day Adventists from following the same path, Ellen White was called at the very beginning of our church, when it hadn't even been organized yet. She was called to the prophetic office, or really she liked the word messenger the best. She was God's messenger to help Seventh-day Adventists not make the mistakes that had been done in the past. But if we don't listen to what God revealed to her, we will make the same mistakes of the past. Now, here's evidence that John the Baptist was not speaking in the great and dreadful day of the Lord. In John 3:17 it says, "For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world." Even now, Jesus' primary work is not to condemn anybody, but to offer hope, to offer deliverance from the power of sin. And he doesn't punish people even for the sins they do. One of my Bible study contacts really struggles with that. Every time he sins, he's looking, what is God going to do to me now? No, that's not the way God is working now. That day will come if people don't benefit from his love. That day will come, but it's not now. And it wasn't in the time of John the Baptist. So Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Now, there are natural consequences to sin, and we will get that if we sin, but it's not punishment that he's giving us. So, back to that in Malachi, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." So that has to be just before the second coming of Jesus. And don't worry about the fact that Ellen White is now dead over 100 years, because by 1901, we were told that through her, we were told that it would be a long time because of the failure to follow what God said to do. But he could have come before 1900. Long before 1900, he could have come even during Ellen White's lifetime. But time has gone on. Now this one is very interesting. It comes from Testimonies to Ministers 475 and 6. "Somebody is to come in the spirit and power of Elijah. And when he appears, men may say, 'You are too earnest. You do not interpret the scriptures in the proper way. See, that's the problem. John the Baptist had that problem. Elijah had that problem. Then when they told what the Lord's message was, people said, well, that's not like the Bible. You got a new message here. Men may say, you are too earnest. You do not interpret the scriptures in the proper way. Let me tell you how to teach your message. Now, can an uninspired person straighten out an inspired person? There's no way that we can think we can do that. Now, some pastors appear to be very inspiring, but they don't have the gift in the same way that a prophet has it. And so there's a vast difference between someone that has the gift of prophecy and someone that is trying their best to understand what's right, and they teach what they believe is right. Well then, notice what the next paragraph says. There are many who cannot distinguish between the work of God and that of man. So, in other words, when Elijah prophet comes, there's going to be a lot of people that don't recognize that this is God's special worker, and they won't recognize the message, so that's a problem. But now notice, there's a change of pronouns. I shall tell the truth as God gives it to me. Now, if you analyze that, she's saying, I am the Elijah prophet. It was prophesied there at the end of Malachi, and she is claiming. So, therefore, either she's a bold-faced liar or she's telling the truth. And I trust if anyone has any doubt that by the time this seminar is finished, you won't want to call her a liar. That she is the Elijah that was sent just before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. I shall tell the truth as God gives it to me. And I say now, if you continue to find fault, to have a spirit of variance, you will never know the truth. So, those that criticize her ministry are in great danger. Now, of course, we want people to question. We don't want you to accept her just because somebody says that she's a prophet. You need to study for yourself, and you need to settle that question. But once you settle the question, and you believe she was called to that role of having a direct hotline to God or messages, then if you're at variance with those messages, you will end up not understanding the full truth. Doesn't mean you'll lose all truth, but there's some truth you won't be able to recognize. So that's a pretty strong statement, and it's one that is a real anchor, I believe. Here's another evidence from Revelation 12, verse 17. And the dragon was wroth with the woman. The dragon is the devil. The woman is the church. And it is specifically talking about the Seventh-day Adventist church. That the devil is angry with the Adventist church and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So, two identifying marks. How do you know who is the remnant church? Number one, they keep the commandments. Now, the Catholics teach that you should keep 8 commandments. And they divide the 10th commandment in 2 to show that they pulled one out, which has to do with images. The Protestants teach that you should keep 9 commandments. So we have to look for a church that teaches that we keep all 10. And there are some others that keep the Sabbath, but we are the largest and the one that's most diligent in this work. So that one is easy, but the next one is a little harder. They will have the testimony of Jesus Christ. That means in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there will be a last-day prophet. Now, when I went to school, I was told, that was a long time ago, I was told that this is talking about the Bible. No, it is not. We will have the Bible, yes, but that wouldn't be any mark to convince anybody, because all the churches have the Bible. But this is actually saying to us that there is going to be a modern-day prophet that the Bible calls Elijah prophet. And in all the years that I've lived, I have never seen anybody that could compare with Ellen White. And so I don't have any problem believing that she is the fulfillment of the Adventist Church having the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, we usually go to Revelation 19:10 as well, where it says the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Now, both titles are equally valuable, whether we call the work she did, as well as others, the spirit of prophecy, or whether we call it the testimony of Jesus. That's two good names that we can use. And here we see an equality with the Bible writers. I'll talk more about that later. But in Revelation 1, verses 1 and 2, it says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, meaning John, who bear record of the word of God and of the testimony of Jesus Christ. So John, the writer of Revelation, had the testimony of Jesus. Ellen White had the testimony of Jesus. So she is equal to any Bible prophet, any what I call book writing prophet. She is equal. She has the testimony of Jesus. Now this one is not by Ellen White, and I haven't been able to find out who spoke it. But I believe he was exactly right in what he said, and this is recorded in a book called Loma Linda Messages. Most of that book is Ellen White's quotes, but there are a few things here and there that are not. So here's this one. Obedience to the law of God and the spirit of prophecy has always distinguished the true people of God. So there's the two identifying marks. It said if you go back in history, you can find the true people of God are obedient to the law of God, and they have the gift of prophecy. Now, they did go some periods of time where some generations didn't have it, but they had one that was current, wasn't too far back. And so that has always been the two marks of God's people. But then he adds another interesting thought. And the test is usually given on present manifestations. And I'll read more about this, but what he's saying is that what we do with the last prophet shows what we're doing with all the rest that went before. He says there's a test that comes to God's people when the final prophet speaks to them in their day. There is a test. And if they don't like that prophet and yet claim to believe all the other prophets, they're really fooling themselves. And then he gives two examples. In Jeremiah's day, the people had no question about the message of Moses, Elijah, or Elisha, but they did question and put aside the message sent of God to Jeremiah until its force and power was wasted and there was no remedy but for God to carry them away into captivity. Now, I hope you've studied the book of Jeremiah. It's kind of boring in some ways, but it really gets the point across that he's talking about. Because there was all kinds of false prophets, and they were all saying, God said that he will always watch out for Jerusalem, and don't listen to Jeremiah at all, because he's saying you better yield to Babylon, otherwise he's going to wipe out the city. And so finally Jeremiah had to say, well, wait and see. If Babylon takes over Jerusalem, then you'll know I'm the true prophet. And so he had all kinds of bad experiences trying to be a prophet. But notice, at the same time, they were saying, we believe everything Moses said. We believe everything that the other prophets said, but we just don't believe Jeremiah. We don't think he's right. Likewise, here's the second example he gives. Likewise, in the days of Christ, the people had learned that Jeremiah's message was true. And they persuaded themselves to believe that if they had lived in the days of their fathers, they would have accepted his message. Now, we could get other examples, but here's two examples. Jesus was a prophet. He was more than a prophet. And he was fulfilling the exact same work to show them where they were misunderstanding their Bible. And they said, well, we don't think he's right. But Jeremiah was right. We believe what he said. We believe what Moses said and all the rest, but we don't believe what Jesus is saying. So this is a real warning to all of us. What we do with Ellen White determines what we're doing with the rest. Now, of course, you have a right to be skeptical in the beginning until you've had enough evidence. I have a lot more evidence than what I can share with you in these three talks. Everybody that I've given the full evidence to, that I've been studying with, decided to accept Ellen White. So there's plenty of evidence, and you can find it. And thus, once you've had the evidence and you can see, you better not turn away, because it's very, very important. Now, there's another way we can find out that her ministry is biblical. And there's 4 major tests that is taught in almost every school of theology. And so I'll just share those as well briefly. There's a lot more that could be said. In Isaiah 8:20, it says, to the law and to the testimony. There it is. To the 10 Commandments and the rest of the law that's based on those 10 Commandments, and to the testimony of Jesus, which is given in the past. To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, or we could say the Bible, it is because there is no light in them. So anytime another prophet comes by, we have to check it out compared to the other prophets. And if we find discrepancies, then we don't accept that person as a prophet. Now, I've had to answer a lot of questions in the past. So far, nobody's asked a question that I couldn't satisfy myself with. Yes? testimony of Jesus is the Word of God. Oh, by giving the evidence that I'm sharing with you, it's the best way they deserve. It's really not fair to, even on Sabbath morning, it's not fair to make statements about her writings that show we believe she's inspired, but they haven't had the evidence yet. We need to give the evidence so that a person can make up their own mind about it. So that, to me, is always the best way. Give the evidence. And you'll get a lot of it from these studies. Now, here's a testimony. It's found in the 4th volume of the biography of Ellen White. I don't know if you've been familiar with that, but there's a 6th volume series that deals with her entire life. I don't agree with everything in it, but this one, of course, you can't disagree with. It says, I, S.N. Haskell, happened to be born in the East and embraced the truth there, and so have battled in this line, he means about the testimonies, a good deal. Nothing pleased me more than to get those who oppose the visions together and have a Bible reading on the testimonies. So as he traveled from church to church, almost every church had people that were struggling to believe she was a prophet. And so he would always offer to them, if you think there's something wrong in her writings, you ask that question, and then I will show you from the Bible that what she said is in agreement with the Bible. And before we began, we always made this statement, that if they could find any line in the testimonies that pertained to a doctrine that I could not establish from the Bible, I would give up the testimonies. So that was the statement at the beginning. If you think you have a question that is not in agreement with the Bible, let's take a look at that. And he did that for years. I don't know how many, 25, 30 years he did that, going from church to church. And here's his testimony at the end. There I will stand today, so I believe the testimonies. So in other words, nobody was ever able to bring up a teaching in her writings that was not in agreement with the Bible. Now, I had a test one time. You've probably heard of the Seventh-day Baptist. They were kind of a split off of the Millerite movement, like we came out of the Millerite movement. But one of the things they hate is Ellen White. And so I was studying the Bible with a lady, and her friend from the Seventh-day Baptist gave her a document with 100 discrepancies between Ellen White and the Bible. And so I was afraid this might influence her, so I decided I better start studying it. Well, by the time I got to the 20th one, she decided to be baptized, so I didn't finish the 100. But out of the 20 that I studied, this is what I heard, or what I found. Some of their objections came because they didn't understand what the Bible said. Some of their objections came because they didn't understand what Ellen White was saying. You know, when you just reach in and grab something, you can misunderstand it. And the third thing I found was sometimes they didn't understand the Bible or what Ellen White was saying. And so to my satisfaction, I was prepared to give an answer to all 20 of those supposed discrepancies between her writings and the Bible. Now, we do have to say this. When she is sharing stories that are in the Bible, there are details that you cannot find in the Bible. So we don't want to make it sound like she never said anything that's not in the Bible. But when it comes to truth, she never presented any truth that wasn't in the Bible. And so that can be demonstrated for those who, who have doubts and have concerns. After the third meeting, I hope we will have more time for questions. So write some down if you have any, and we'll try to help with any. It might be some I got to go and study about, but I'll give you what I know. So I believe Ellen White passes this test number 1. I've been studying her writings for at least 65 years, and I can give the same testimony that he gave. I've taught many classes where people have questions. The biblical test number 2 is found in Deuteronomy 18, verse 22. When a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken. But the prophet has spoken it presumptuously. In other words, he hatched up that idea, or Satan put it in his mind. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. Now, I also want to point out it has to be 100%. A false prophet, if they predict one thing that doesn't happen, they're a false prophet. However, we do have to also mention that there's what we call conditional, skip my mind a moment. Conditional prophecy. Now, conditional prophecy is a prophecy where either God prophesies good or bad, but it depends on what the people do. And the best example is Nineveh. Jonah was given a true message, 40 days, and Nineveh will be destroyed. Because if the people hadn't changed, it would have been destroyed. But they did change, and they were sorry for their sins. It was led out by the king, and so it wasn't destroyed. Does that make Jonah a false prophet? No. And so you've got to determine, is this a promise that is conditional or not? Like, maybe I should mention one other. There is some amazing promises in the Bible that God would never turn away from the Jewish people. But did he have to turn away? Yes, because if his people do not obey, he cannot fulfill the most wonderful promise to them. That's conditional promises. There's another one which is in Jeremiah 28:9. The prophet which prophesieth of peace, when the word of the prophet shall come to pass, then shall the prophet be known that the Lord hath truly sent him. Now, I've heard of quite a few prophets. Some of them called themselves a prophet and some didn't. Today, it's not popular to call yourself a prophet. So you got to be aware of people who are making predictions, and if they don't come to pass, unless it's a conditional prophecy. I'll give you some examples of this. While early in Ellen White's ministry, there was a man by the name of Hiram Patch, and he was engaged to a young lady, and they were having some evangelistic meetings in the Adventist church, and he was attending those meetings. But the Baptists, which often they do, were having meetings at the same time. So he was going to their meetings, some as well, and he got to the point where he was confused. Who has the truth? And so Ellen White was given a message for him. And she said to him, if you will wait 1 month, you will know whether the Adventists have the true message or whether the Baptists haven't. So he decided to wait, not make his decision. 2 weeks from that prophecy, the speaker at the Baptist meetings was discovered to be a thief. He had stolen thousands of dollars from the county office, and he tried to lie about it, but they discovered his wife hiding the money in a snowbank, and so they found the money, and he was guilty. Well, now let's suppose that it took 6 weeks for this to happen. Ellen White would have been a false prophet. But it happened within the 30 days that she prophesied. Now, her main work was not to make prophecies, but she had some of them. And there's some unique ones as well. For instance, you can read about medical things in her writings, and you can know that almost everything she said was wrong in her day. But as time has gone by, more and more they're being proven true. You see, we don't usually call those prophecies, but in a way they are. And so she was telling what God thinks about these things. And then there's other things as well, but I don't want to go too long here with this one. The second one we'll look at is Stephen Smith. Now, Stephen Smith was a good Adventist in the beginning, but he got tripped up with some Adventists that were critical of James White and Ellen White and some of the other pioneers, and he got filled with that negative spirit, and so he just went around blasting Ellen White. But one day, he got a letter in the mail, and he saw it was from Ellen G. White. As soon as he saw it, he got mad as could be. And he said, I'm not going to read that letter. So, but he didn't throw it away. He took it upstairs in his attic, and he had a trunk up there. And he lifted up the contents of the trunk, and he put the letter in the bottom of it. And he went his way, and pretty soon he forgot about the letter. 25 years later, his wife had been reading the Review and Herald all this time, and he picked up an article. They picked up the paper and read an article, and he thought, that's pretty good stuff. And so, not long after that, Ellen White came to the church where it was near him, and he decided he would go. And but before he went, he started remembering that letter that was up in the trunk in the attic. So he went, and he got out that letter, and he read it before he went to the meeting. So here's what he said to everybody that was present that day. This comes from a book, Spirit of Prophecy, Treasure Chest, page 49. Now, this is hard to get, but if you can ever get one, it'll be a blessing. The Voice of Prophecy, when HMS Richards Sr. was in charge of it, asked the White Estate to prepare this book so that he could teach a class to anyone that wanted it on Ellen White's ministry. And it truly is a treasure chest of information. Here's what Stephen Smith said. Brethren, every word of that testimony for me is true, and I accept it. I have come to that place where I finally believe the testimonies are all of God. And if I had heeded the one God sent to me, as well as the rest, it would have changed the whole course of my life. And I would have been a very different man. If I had heeded them, it would have saved me a world of trouble. I want you to tell our people everywhere that another rebel has surrendered. So, actually, when he stood up to speak, they thought he was going to blast the leadership again, and they were a little nervous. But he was going to give this testimony, and in it he asked that we tell everybody about his testimony, because he was so sad that he had ruined his life in fighting against the very message that God wanted people to have. A third one is the San Francisco earthquake of April 18, 1906. Now, Ellen White doesn't necessarily want that to be used as a prophecy, but here's what she said in 1902. Not long hence, these cities will suffer under the judgments of God. San Francisco and Oakland are becoming as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord will visit them in wrath. And if you read any accounts of that earthquake, the people who knew nothing about, Adventism, they got the message. This is a judgment of God that's happened on San Francisco. So it was told her 4 years before it happened. Another one is the Civil War statement in the Parkville SDA Church. If you go to Michigan, you can visit a reconstructed Parkville church. And this is what she said. There are those in this house who will lose sons in that war, talking about the Civil War. No less than 5 families in the room that day lost sons in the carnage during the Civil War. Now, nobody expected the Civil War to occur when she made that statement. Now, suppose that nobody in that church died. Now, White would be a false prophet. But God gave ample evidence. God sees the future just as well as the past. And so when it's God that gives the message, it will work out. Not even because he makes it work out. He could do that. It's not because he makes it work out, but he sees it before it happens. Biblical test number 3 won't take long. 1 John 4, 1 and 2. Beloved, believe not every spirit or prophet, but try or test the prophets, whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. Hereby know ye the Spirit of God. Every prophet that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. Well, I don't know of any prophet that says more about Jesus. Both every aspect of his life, as well as that he came as a real human being. We have Desire of Ages. We have Steps to Christ. We have Ministry of Healing. And then, if you read the testimonies, that 9-volume series called The Testimonies, she presents Jesus in every letter of correction. She tells pretty straight what's wrong with this individual, but then she always upholds Jesus. She always offers forgiveness and talks about Jesus to try to draw them back to Jesus so they will give up their sins and follow what is right. So all of her writings can be considered Christ-centered. Test number 4. Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns, or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. Then the lesson again. Wherefore, by their fruits ye shall know them. So what were the fruits of Ellen White's ministry? Again, from Loma Linda Messages, this brother made this comment. Page 34. The question naturally arises. Whence comes this wisdom revealed through this gift? He's talking about Ellen White. Which is more than the combined wisdom of all the church besides? In other words, you can put all the scholars in the Adventist church, and one prophet can do better than all of them. You can put together all the best minds in the Adventist church, and one prophet can do better than them. So this is a point that he's making, and then he gives some details. As the message developed and grew, it was this gift that urged the extension of the work. And from that day to this, has done more than all other influences combined to push the message into the regions beyond. So the Adventist church would not be where it is today if it wasn't for the ministry of Ellen White. And then he gives some other details. In every development of the message, evangelical. So in our evangelism, we wouldn't be where we are today without her. And if we fully followed her counsel, we'd be farther than we are. Education, medical, and publishing. So in all those areas, we would be far behind where we are if we hadn't had that advice. The spirit of prophecy has not only led the way, but given light on how to conduct these different departments in such a way as to bring success in the spread of the message. So as he looked at it from his perspective, which was probably, at least close to 100 years ago, when this brother said this, he could see the blessings that have been given to the Adventist church. Now we'll close this message with just a few things that Ellen White says about herself and her gift. First selected message is 39. I gave myself, my whole being, to God, to obey his call in everything. So even if you look at the personal life of Ellen White, you'll find an extremely obedient person. And since that time, my life has been spent in giving the message with my pen and in speaking before large congregations. But notice what she says. It is not I who controls my words and actions at such times. There were times when she would try to say something and it would disappear from her mind because it wasn't time for her to say that. So God controlled every sermon, every, as she says here, every message that she wrote and every sermon that she gave. Now, some people have made a comment that I'm not sure I can trace it out to find out whether it's true, but they say in her later life she didn't always need that and didn't have that kind of backing always. But I'm still sticking with the prophet, regardless of whether she did or didn't. But certainly during this period of time, she makes it plain. That's the kind of help she had from God. And in Review and Herald of August 26, 1890, those who resist the messages of God through his humble servant think they are at variance with Sister White. See, that's why people don't mind attacking something that she said or trying to get rid of it in some way. Because her ideas are not in harmony with theirs. But this variance is not with Sister White, but with the Lord. So, if we don't like Jeremiah's message, it's the Lord we don't like. And it's the same with Ellen White, who has given her work to do. Another one, page 37. Although I am as dependent upon the Spirit of the Lord in writing my views as I am in receiving them, notice that. Otherwise, if that wasn't true, then God has to depend on the prophet's memory, and a prophet's memory is no better than yours or mine. So she got the message twice. She got it in the beginning, then when she went to write it out, she saw it again so that she could write out exactly what was going on. Now, the words weren't given her. None of the prophets had the words given to them. But a message was given, which usually was often in pictures, and they were writing down what they saw in the pictures. Yet the words I employ in describing what I have seen are my own, unless they be those spoken to me by an angel, which I always enclose in marks of quotation. Now, there are some Seventh-day Adventists that will only believe what's in quotation marks. Well, I'm glad they at least believe that. But that's not all that's inspired. That's what the angel actually said, but the rest she put in her own words. And the last one, this is again that brother Loma Linda Messages 33. Obedience to the law of God and the spirit of prophecy has always distinguished the true people of God. And the test is usually given on present manifestations. So our test as Seventh-day Adventists is whether we really believe the Bible depends on whether we really believe that Ellen White was a prophet. So if you don't believe it yet, keep studying. Don't just throw it aside. Keep studying until you can say she's either of the devil or she's of the Lord. And once you say she's of the Lord, never give it up. Because if you do, there is great danger in doing that. Well, may God bless the evidence I've given you this morning.